Hello, and welcome to Guns and Edelweiss. Today we will examine what is arguably the best submachine gun ever put in the hands of fighting men, the iconic Thompson M1A1. The Thompson submachine gun was originally designed by General John T. Thompson to be used in the trenches of World War I. Due to the decimating impact of the World War I Vickers machine guns, which were typically manned by a crew of 3 to 4 men, Thompson, who was a former chief of small arms for the U.S. Ordnance Department and a firearms designer, realized that advancing soldiers needed something better than just a bolt-action rifle. A new firearm was needed, capable of rapid fire, without manual reloading, and individually manned to be able to put more bullets on target. Thompson established the Auto Ordnance Corporation in 1916. However, by November 1918, when the first shipment of submachine guns was ready, World War I was over. The Thompson submachine gun went on to become infamous during the Prohibition era of the Roaring Twenties. It was used by law enforcement agencies and gangsters alike, gaining nicknames such as the Street Sweeper and the Chicago Typewriter. The Thompson was first officially used in combat operations by the U.S. Marine Corps during the Latin American Banana Wars of the 1920s. In 1938, the Thompson submachine gun was adopted by the U.S. military, serving throughout the European and Pacific theaters in the hands of Allied troops. It was widely utilized in British and Canadian commando units, as well as in the U.S. Army paratrooper and ranger battalions. Due to Thompson's high rate of fire and stopping power, it proved very effective in the kinds of close combat these special operation troops undertook. The Auto Ordnance Corporation was the primary contractor of military Thompsons for the United States, who in turn subcontracted most of the manufacturing of these firearms and their parts. The majority of World War II Thompsons, like this one, were produced by Savage Arms. In total, more than 1.5 million Thompsons were manufactured during World War II. At the height of World War II, there was a need for the firearm to be revised for mass military production in order to reduce manufacturing time and cost. This resulted in 3 iterations of military Thompsons with significant changes between the first 2. Iteration 1 being the M1928A1, with main features such as a friction-delayed blowback action using the Blish mechanism with the charging handle on the top of the receiver, possibility to accept both stick and drum magazines, a cuts compensator and cooling fins on the barrel, a detachable buttstock, and commercial-grade bluing. The designers at Savage Arms then identified key simplifications that could be done to the original Thompson M1928A1. This leads us to iteration 2 being the M1, with main features such as no compensator and a barrel without cooling fins, a simplified rear sight, the possibility to accept only 20 or 30 round stick magazines. The military deemed they were more reliable than the drum magazines, which would rattle, make a lot of noise, and were cumbersome to carry around and more complicated to reload. Replaced the friction-delayed blowback action with a straight blowback action. Repositioned the charging handle to the right side of the receiver. Bluing was also eliminated, and parkerization was used instead for rust prevention. The buttstock now became non-detachable. The final design iteration, being the M1A1, which is what we see here, was standardized in October of 1942. It could be produced in half the time of the 1928A1 and at a much lower cost. Its main features were the replacement of the M1 bolt, which had a floating firing pin and hammer, with a bolt having the firing pin machined to its face, further eliminating unnecessary parts. The reinforced stock, protective sight wings, and 30-round stick magazine became standardized. The M1A1 Thompson was used all the way through to the Vietnam War by the US military. Generations of soldiers' lives depended on it, and it gained the nickname Tommy Gun in honor of its inventor. Now let's dive in and have a closer look at this fine example of an M1A1 Thompson that was manufactured at the height of World War II. First, we will carry out a safety check. We remove the magazine, it is clear, and we will inspect the chamber to make sure it's also clear. The Thompson M1A1 is very well made with forged and machined steel. This is an open bolt select fire submachine gun using a direct blowback action with a cyclic rate of approximately 700 to 800 rounds per minute. It is very controllable with relatively gentle recoil impulse due to its heavy weight, which provides for good accuracy in distances up to approximately 150 meters in both firing modes. It also has the last round bolt hold open. Let's take some measurements. It has a magazine capacity of up to 30 rounds chambered in 45 ACP. The overall length is approximately 811 millimeters. The barrel length is approximately 267 millimeters. An approximate weight of 5 kilograms. Let's take a real-time measurement of the trigger pull weight. Approximately 10 pounds, 15.9 ounces. Thompson M1A1s were manufactured by Auto Ordnance and Savage Arms. All these firearms had the Auto Ordnance roll mark at the end of the right-hand side of the receiver, as we can see here. However, only a small portion of World War II Thompsons were actually produced at the Auto Ordnance factory. Auto Ordnance subcontracted Savage in 1939 to manufacture Thompsons. Only in 1941 did Auto Ordnance open its own factory to assist Savage with the increasing wartime demand. Savage Arms manufactured most of their own parts, but some were subcontracted further to Savage's sister company, J. Stevens Arms. A letter S was stamped into all parts made by Savage. Parts manufactured by Stevens were marked with a block letter S that resembles the number 5. In order to identify the original manufacturer of an M1A1, we need to look for a combination of markings and acceptance stamps on the upper receiver and on the trigger assembly. Let's have a closer look at these markings and some of the key components of this M1A1. Here we have the new Lyman L type of rear sight, better suited for military application, with ears designed to keep the leaf from being damaged. This fixed rear sight has a peep and a notch on the top for longer distance target acquisition. This version of the rear sight was put in production in July of 1942. Some of the Thompson M1A1s were marked US property on the receiver, just behind the rear sight. Not all M1A1 Thompsons had this US property stamp. The reason for this is not clear, but it's presumed that those stamped with US property markings were destined for Lend-Lease program armies as Allied support. This Thompson does not have such markings. The reciprocating charging handle is located on the right-hand side of the receiver. Here we can see faintly the GEG stamp appearing twice, once on the receiver nose and once above the magazine well. GEG stands for George E. Goll, who was the Civil Quality Control Inspector for Auto Ordnance during military production of Thompsons at the Savage Arms plant. His initials appear on every Savage Thompson submachine gun manufactured for military service. Below the GEG stamp, right above the magazine well, we can see again very faintly the FGA stamp. FGA stands for Colonel Frank J. Atwood, who was the Army Inspector of Ordnance from 1942 until 1946. His initials appear on all Savage-made M1 and M1A1 Thompsons. The capital letter P was used as the firing proof mark by the US Ordnance Department during World War II. This proof mark was usually applied to the barrel, as seen here. Right next to it, we see a block S mark, indicating that the barrel was made by Stevens. The wooden horizontal foregrip is stamped with the letter code M on the back edge. as we can see here, standing for manufacturer Strombeck-Becker. The front sight, which is very durable due to its milled steel construction, is marked with a block S for Stevens. Now, what can we tell about this particular M1A1 from its serial number? The unique serial number required for registration of this firearm is marked under the model designation roll mark at the end of the left-hand side of the receiver. The serial number is in the 312,000 range. From public archives, we know that M1A1s in the serial number range starting with 260,000 were dated March 1943, and with serial number range starting 317,000 dated June 1943. We can therefore estimate that originally this M1A1 would have left the assembly line somewhere around April of 1943. Here, at the bottom of the trigger assembly, we can see another serial number in the 135,000 range. The trigger assembly serial number on this M1A1 does not match the receiver, indicating that it must have gone through an arsenal rebuild during its service life. Trigger assemblies were commonly switched out during service. At a later point during the production of M1A1s, serial numbering of the trigger assembly was discontinued. Most Thompson M1A1s have mismatching serial numbers between the receivers and the trigger assemblies, as all these parts were completely interchangeable and military armories never needed to pay attention matching these parts. Based on the previously mentioned public archives, we can estimate that this trigger assembly was manufactured somewhere around December of 1942. Behind the grip, we can see the marking S, indicating that this entire lower assembly was also made by Savage. On the left-hand side of the trigger assembly, there are two 180-degree rotation selector switches. The rearward selector, also known as the safety lever, allows the operator to switch between safe towards the back and fire towards the front. The frontward selector, also known as the rocker pivot, allows the operator to switch between the two firing modes of semi towards the back and full auto towards the front. One mechanical particularity that I have noticed is that it's only possible to switch between semi and full auto and vice versa when the bolt is locked to the rear. The Savage produced trigger assemblies had the words full and auto on two separate lines, as seen here. The Auto Ordnance trigger assemblies had full auto in one line. The original finish can be seen on the pivot plate here and on the rocker pivot, which is also marked with a block S for Stevens. Military contract Thompsons originally had a flat blue-black dew-light finish. The magazine release is actuated with the right thumb by pushing upwards to drop the magazine. The 30-round double-stack, double-feed stick magazine was standardized in December of 1941. Based on the markings that we see here, this particular magazine was manufactured by the Crosby Company, who in February of 1942 were awarded their first government contract to build exclusively 30-round stick magazines for the US military. The buttstock has a trapdoor, as we can see here, to store an oil container for servicing the Thompson. Whenever a Thompson submachine gun was processed through a rebuild program, the initials of the arsenal or depot performing the work were usually stamped into the weapon's buttstock. Here we can see the marking MR, which stands for the Mount Rainier Ordnance Depot. The Mount Rainier Ordnance Depot served the United States military between 1942 and 1963 as a primary vehicle, arms, and missile repair facility. This depot provided ordnance equipment to the Pacific area and Alaska during World War II. Lastly, we have here an original US M3 sling, which was on this M1A1. Most M3 slings were yellow in color and with blue steel or brass metal fillings. The usual result of an arsenal rebuilding process during World War II would be a weapon close to new condition but with an assembly of mismatched parts and a newly parkerized grey-green finish. In conclusion, taking the previously mentioned points into consideration, this particular Thompson M1A1 appears to be an arsenal rebuild from the Mount Rainier Depot, which was deployed with US military personnel in the Pacific theater of World War II. For any military Thompson submachine gun enthusiasts and/or collectors out there, if you do not already have it, I would highly recommend Frank Ianmeiko's 3rd edition reference book that we see here entitled American Thunder. Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, share and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.